Welcome to this next session of Creativity from Vienna to the World. Our topic today is designing new careers. And we have two wonderful speakers with us today. I will be starting by introducing the first one, who is Dr. Ladislav Jackson, an art and architectural historian. He's a faculty member of the Department of History and Theory of Art at Brno University of Technology. And he teaches global and local 20th century art history and critical theory, including gender and queer studies and critical race studies. He has authored and edited numerous books, most lately Myth of an Architect, Jan Kotjara 150, which was published in 2021 in collaboration with Helena Chapkova. He has two forthcoming books, Philosopher of Structures, which is about the Czech-American architect and engineer Jaroslav Bulivka, and the book Images of Queer Desires, which is about queering art history and visual studies in the Czech lands. He also works as a curator, and recently curated exhibitions include Philosopher of Structures, which was shown in Brno and in Prague, and Shapes, Colors, Comfort, Furniture Chitona, shown in Cheb, Sobieslav, and České Budějovice. And his paper today is titled Liane Zimbler, From Viennese Sentimental Interior to California Mid-Century Modernism. Ladislav, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for the introduction. Let me share the screen. I hope you can all see it. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for the introduction. Hello, everyone. First of all, let me thank Julia and Megan for putting this wonderful, wonderful project together. It has been an absolute joy for me to participate both actively and in audience during previous events. Like most of the best things in life, research on Liane Zimbler came to me by accident. When Julia and Megan put out a call for papers for this project last fall, I thought it was a great idea, but rather a very specific topic, and that I had nothing to contribute with on this subject. At the end of October, however, I visited the School of Architecture and Design at Virginia Tech in Blacksburg in my role of the Vice Dean of International Relations at my school. My colleagues there prepared a very rich and interesting program for me, which included a visit to the International Archive of Women in Architecture, which I had never heard of before. However, there was a minor miscommunication when arranging this visit, and the archive got the impression that I was from Vienna, and the wonderful archivist Jade Snelling prepared for me a sample of the Austrian women that they have in the collection. Among them were several drawings by Liane Zimbler. I was charmed by their beauty and wanted to know more about her. So immediately after returning to my hotel, I began to search for information about her. One of Zimbler's most published designs is the interior design of the hall in Robert Plaček's villa in Brno, which rose my interest even more. Sorry. Liane Zimbler, born Juliana Fischer in Přerov to a Czech-German Jewish family, graduated from the Kunstgewerbeschule in Vienna, where she received the status of an extraordinary student. As she recalled later, she was only one of two women among 40 men. Here she met Josef Hoffmann, Franz Žižek, Josef Frank, and Oskar Sternat. It is not yet exactly certain which teachers directly taught her and what classes, however, she met all of them. After the First World War, she established her own studio in Vienna, although she initially collaborated with the Wiener Werkstätte. Zimbler has recently received some research attention, especially from the Viennese design historian Sabine Forstgruber. A large piece of research was done by Christina Greve in her thesis on Zimbler, which was defended at the Technical University in Berlin in 2003. And chapters were devoted to Zimbler in their recent books by Caroline Wolgemuth and Ursula Prokop. Nevertheless, I could not find satisfactory information anywhere about Zimbler's work in Brno. So at this point, I started to dive down the rabbit hole, and a new research interest was born. When Zimbler's enormously prolific and rich body of work spanning nearly 7 decades opened in front of me, I felt sorry that the architect, who was in many ways ahead of her time, was not given more attention, to which I would like to contribute today. The commission for the interiors of the villa of a businessman Robert Plaček in Brno from 1936 shows several of Zimbler's interests and is at the same time the most extensive collection of her preserved drawings. In 1936, Robert and Teresa Plaček rented a villa from Rudolf and Božena Trnka, which was designed for them by a local architect 4 years before, Karel Hrabec, in 1932. Plaček came from a very prominent Brno Jewish family. Baruch Plaček was a Brno rabbi and a scientist, George Plaček, who later worked on the Manhattan Project. The Plačeks were also distant relatives of the Tugendhats, builders of Villa Tugendhat by Ludwig Mies van der Rohe in Brno. Thanks to earlier research by my colleagues Dagmar Černoušková and Lucie Waldhanzová, to whom I thank them very much for sharing their progress, I managed to locate the villa, which is actually quite close to the Tugendhat villa. Zimbler designed the complete reconstruction and furnishing of the villa for the Plačeks, who moved in 1936 and lived there only for 2.5 years. The winter garden, which also served as a summer dining room, contained 2 glass walls between which a microclimate was maintained for the cultivation of more demanding plants. However, it was not a whim of the clients, but one of the topics that Zimbler devoted herself to for a long time in her proposals and theoretical writing. And in Brno, she got another opportunity to test it in practice. She published about the placement and care of plants and greenery in residential interiors, both in Austria and later in the United States. Another theme that materialized in Zimbler's project for Brno was designing a space specifically for women. The question arises whether Zimbler was fulfilling the modernist idea that women are biologically determined to a certain range of activities and to surround themselves with a certain range of objects, or whether she thought about the topic more deeply. As I will try to show, the latter one is true. Zimbler was aware of the inequalities that women faced and of the marginalization of women, and she was also aware that these inequalities were manifested in how the domestic space was built and how it was organized over the centuries, and it directed women to a certain position, determined their choices and controlled their activities, not mentioning that it objectified them. This was something that Zimbler tried to change in order to help women in their emancipation, economic, cultural, and social. Zimbler has devoted her entire life to change the situation of women's housing, solve the question what a woman needs in her space, how her space must change during different life stages, and how it should be as practical as possible so that she spends as little time as possible on unpaid housework, to which society condemns her. She knew that a woman needed a proverbial room of her own to have a space for her independent creative work, as Virginia Woolf aptly realized at the same time. Furthermore, Zimbler asked herself the question of how such a room where a woman would have both physical and figurative space of her own should look like, how it should function, how it should be organized, while it will probably be quite small for most of women, at least at the beginning. In my today's talk, I will try to reconstruct in what ways we can talk about Zimbler as a feminist. First of all, I want to deal with how she broke through glass ceilings and how she realized that the emancipation of an individual woman can only be achieved if as many women as possible are truly free. That is, if they find education, employment, and adequate salary. Therefore, I will try to illustrate her lifelong effort to raise and create opportunities for other women. Their organizing was supposed to create an alternative to male power pacts and male power networks. Next, I will briefly comment on how Zimbler benefited from her involvement in women's organizing and how she contributed to it. And finally, I will try to formulate 3 ways to learn from Zimbler in today's design practice, in which her forgotten work and legacy can be useful to us today, 100 years after she began to realize her first orders, her first commissions in Vienna. Art historian and writer Else Hoffmann became a key figure to Zimbler. Next to Max Eisler, an art historian with Czech roots, just like Zimbler, she was her main promoter in contemporary press, which mainly included Innendekoration, Die Österreicherin, Österreichische Kunst. And in addition to Hoffmann, Eisler promoted her in Moderne Bauformen, which he led as an editor, and in Innendekoration as well. But for Zimbler, Hoffmann was far more than just an enlightened journalist who was willing to write about her. Hoffmann dealt with similar topics as Zimbler, the modernization of the world of women, which was supposed to lead to their emancipation. She did so through educational articles, but also practical manuals and fictional prose, fictional books. Plus, she became involved in Wiener Frauenkunst, same as Zimbler. She took some topics and knowledge from Zimbler. In some topics and conclusions, Zimbler learned from Hoffmann. This was the case, for example, with the subject of cottages, weekend housing, so-called second living, and what their economic and modern form should be. Zimbler subsequently devoted herself practically and theoretically to this for a considerable part of the rest of her life. In 1925, Zimbler founded a branch of her architectural office in Prague, which was led by architect Annie Herrenheiser. This was assumed by Zimbler's biographers without further investigation until now. Herrenheiser came from a wealthy Jewish family that got rich from the legal distribution of cocaine, which was considered a legal medicine at the time from the United States. From the profits, they acquired a luxurious villa in a prominent district of Prague, Vinohrady. But as it turned out, the branch of Zimbler's and Herrenheiser's business had a completely different beginning. It was a commission warehouse of the fashion branch of the Wiener Werkstätte, and Annie Herrenheiser was its administrator. And at this point, she didn't have any higher education. Zimbler rented an apartment in a strategic location opposite Prague's main railway station, where Herrenheiser started to live. Zimbler occasionally slept over, and the rest of the apartment served as a warehouse where goods were transported by train directly from Vienna. However, Herrenheiser had bigger ambitions. At the age of 21, she entered into this joint business with Zimbler, but following her example and probably under her guidance, she began to study architecture. Probably at the German Technical University in Prague, there are no records of her studies at the Czech Technical University. At this point, their joint office apparently turned into a design firm, and they moved to an administrative palace in the center of Prague. In the 1930s, Herrenheiser participated in international architectural congresses and reported on them in the architectural journals. However, Zimbler kept the apartment near the railway station, and Herrenheiser continued to live there. At the end of the 30s, Hedwig Rosenbaum, 40 years older than Herrenheiser, moved in with her. She was the first Czech professional tennis player. She won some tennis matches in 1900 in Paris, as well as other. And she was also another nonconformist emancipated woman, widowed at the time. We have no information about the fate of Herrenheiser. A large part of her family was murdered during the Holocaust. Herrenheiser apparently managed to emigrate, probably to New Zealand. Rosenbaum passed away shortly after the war began. Liane Zimbler emigrated just a couple of months after the Anschluss of Austria by Nazi Germany. She came with her husband, Otto Zimbler, and their then 16-year-old daughter, Eva, to New York on a ship Paris on September 4, 1938. Together with several friends from Vienna, she headed to Southern California, where she immediately began lecturing for various professional organizations. She was soon employed by Anita Thor, only 4 years older than Zimbler. Thor was a well-known Los Angeles interior designer and a decorator who already had an established network of clientele. She became famous in 1936 after the opening of the California House and Garden Exposition, which was a manifesto of the new eclecticism for the California suburbs. 8 exhibition houses with gardens and furnished interiors were presented here. California House, New Orleans House, Plywood House, which was designed by another Viennese expat, Richard Neutra, English Cottage, French House, Economy Cottage, and Colonel Evans Package House. Thor designed the interiors of English Cottage, but unfortunately she died prematurely in 1941. Zimbler took over her firm. Zimbler soon employed her daughter Eva, who became a partner in the firm. As Eva Zimbler later recalled, she, quote, started her apprenticeship in her mother's office in Vienna at the age of 5 and learned to read blueprints before she was able to read, end quote. They began promoting themselves as a creative pair of mother and daughter. They also built their branding around the generational gap. The young Eva Zimbler was supposed to represent a guarantee of modernity and progressiveness, while Liane Zimbler, in her 50s, was supposed to offer tradition, the connection of the new with the old, and conservative qualities. Although both creators were quite variable in style, and Zimbler, until her old age, came up with various innovations, inventions, and experiments. For Zimbler, cooperation with female artists and decorators was essential. On the one hand, it was a way to ensure work, employment in architecture and commissions for her colleagues, and on the other hand, it catered to the Viennese taste of the bourgeois clientele. In Vienna between the wars, she enjoyed working with the artist and fashion designer Maria Strauss-Lickartz. Strauss-Lickartz was able to provide her with paintings for furniture, walls, hand-painted wallpapers, glass, and so on. The ornamental register mainly included traditional floral motifs, imitations of folk art, and, above all, Oriental patterns. In this respect, Zimbler was a product of her time, and in both Vienna and California, she satisfied her clientele's desires for exoticism, Orientalism, and colonialism. She has never found a similar artistic harmony with the versatile artist after she relocated to California. Else Krumerk-Crawford did several artworks and decorative works for a couple of Zimbler's later interiors, mostly from 1970s. But she worked primarily with her husband, the architect Victor Gruen. Her work ranged from embroideries, textile paintings, ceramics, mosaics, decorative lamps, to metal applications, as you can see in the Beverly Hills condominium. Zimbler thus more often resorted to prefabricated decoration, extravagant wallpapers, often from the production of one Wheat Company, the Fine Arts Company, and other manufacturers. She collaborated several times with the painter Johannes Schiefer, who was 4 years younger than her, and and in addition to the applied decorations, he imitated post-impressionism in his paintings. Similar to Crawford, he also had a wide range of media and materials. Zimbler's effort to uplift other women and create creative and earning opportunities for them is one rather intuitive facet of Zimbler's feminism. But Zimbler soon began to organize herself. In 1926, she co-founded Wiener Frauenkunst, an organization bringing together women artists, designers, and architects. It was founded following the Deutsche Frauenkunst exhibition, which was organized by the Wiener Werkstätte in 1925 in Vienna's Künstlerhaus. Wiener Frauenkunst began to organize annual shows, with perhaps the most significant, the third one, taking place in 1930 as part of the International Congress of Women and Professional Women. International Congress of Business and Professional Women. Art and craft created by women became a manifesto of emancipation, but at the same time, it was recognized as a legitimate profession in which women should have equal opportunities. Zimbler did not want the art to be presented only as solitaires on the walls or on the plinths, but wanted to show how the works of art can be placed in the domestic living space. While at the same time, she wanted the exhibition to be a pleasant experience where there would be a place to relax, as you can see here. She devoted herself to this in all the other exhibitions she participated in, followed by Die Schöne Wand exhibition in 1933, as you can see here. And again, you can see the living corner or the relaxation corner designed by Zimbler here. She showed and promoted how to incorporate art into a modern interior, even in the United States. In addition to the annual exhibitions of the American Institute of Decorators, in which she participated between the 50s and the 70s, we should mention her participation in the exhibition Living with Famous Paintings, which showed a combination of new interior elements, including plastic furniture, with works of old, modern, and contemporary masters. Zimbler picked a 17th century painting, as you can see in the picture. Zimbler even claimed, quote, "Mod, like modern, is out, old is in for young people," end quote, because she considered old art and antiques to be a suitable investment for young people. Also because it is no longer subject to any fashion waves. We change the appliances, we do not change Rembrandt. Later, she even invented a system to adjust various pictures and antiques on the wall, which she named hook and loop, non-invasive and invisible hooks applied into the wall, so the aesthetics of the art and antiques is not spoiled. It was thanks to the Wiener Frauenkunst that Zimbler became acquainted with current discussions and topics of contemporary feminism. Here she met, for example, Františka Plamínková, one of the most original leaders of the Central European feminism of this time. Her most famous quotes include, quote, "Men have created the entire society. The state system is masculine, the system of education is masculine, the family law and the organization of family is masculine, the organization of work environment is masculine. A woman has always entered into the male-dominated environments as a disturbing element," end quote. Zimbler clearly understood the systemic problem of patriarchy, which can be explained by her later statement, quote, "We have always been number two, so we have to try harder," end quote. Even when she wrote about the general topics and general problems of decoration and organization of a living space, she wrote from the woman's perspective. Organization was much more important to her than style or ornaments, because it was about the constant value of functionality. And the woman could thus avoid the following situation, quote, "My house could be so beautiful, but my husband, the children, and the dogs mess it up," end quote. What can we learn from Zimbler, apart from the already mentioned? I will try to formulate here mainly three of her inputs that she promoted already 90 years ago. And yet, it seems that we cannot just get rid of the myth of endless production and acquiring new and new things, or the idea of staying in one apartment throughout the entire life, even though it is not suitable and practical for most of the time. The essential benefit of Zimbler's residential interior is that we need a differently equipped and organized space for different life stages. Although architects in modern Vienna began to deal with the specifics of children's rooms, children's space, they were often mainly concerned with removing the children somewhere and displacing them so that they would not disturb the stylized interiors. Even when Josef Hoffmann was designing a children's room, he designed it as a miniature of an adult interior, only considering surface finishing that would make it easier to wash. Zimbler, on the other hand, wanted to design children's rooms that would require as few changes as possible as children grow up and grow with them, a quality we only associate with the modular furniture designed after the Second World War. In Vienna, but also later in the United States, she came to design rooms for teenage women, where she placed particular emphasis on ensuring that the interior did not conflict with the changing tastes of teenage girls over time. Usually, she designed these rooms in such a way that the entire wall was made up of a blackboard or a built-in board on which the resident would be able to attach her own decorations, and that the room had a day and night mode, ergo a living and a sleeping function. Zimbler designed a large number of apartments and rooms for single women, whether it was an apartment for the sculptor Lily Airona, oh sorry, we're not there yet, or other unknown women. She indulged them with everything that was available to men, including a stocked bar, a functional kitchen, king-sized bed, plenty of storage space, and space for intellectual and creative work. Zimbler also designed housing for a new bride, which was supposed to put together all the elements that a couple needs, such as a king-size bed, a kitchen for daily cooking, and so on, in the smallest possible space that the young newlyweds can afford. In 1932, Zimbler designed a mother's room with a nursery, two alcoves, where one was intended for the baby and one as a safe space for the mother to rest, to work, to read, and so on. The birth of children was also the motivation to modernize the bedroom in Vienna's apartment in 1934, which I will mention again in a minute. The woman lost a room of her own. It had been converted into a children's room, and she needed to spend more time in the bedroom during the day. All her life, Zimbler also dedicated herself to the modernization of kitchens, which were still primarily the domain of women, whether they were housewives or hired workers. She correctly perceived their design as the organization of a laboratory, which is what her younger colleague from the Kunstgewerbeschule, Margaret Schitte-Lihotzky, came to in the design of the Frankfurt kitchen. Zimbler found common kitchen furniture impractical, shapeless, monofunctional, and unvariable. She designed the kitchen in such a way that the movement in it is very organic, the work surfaces were of different heights, and the storage spaces were diversified. She also designed compact kitchens, which were closed in a built-in block, and when opened, the work surface and storage spaces became accessible. She promoted living kitchens, where dining is also done on a daily basis. She considered dining rooms to be an exceptional representative space. Later in the 60s, she frequently designed central kitchen islands or breakfast bars. In 1958, she approached a low-cost assignment to convert a double garage on the property of her daughter Eva's house into economical housing of her husband's mother. Zimbler was aware that the housing of senior women, and especially widowed senior women, is in some ways similar to the housing of single women, but at the same time, it must correspond to deteriorating mobility and overall health. So everything must be designed in such a way that it is accessible, within reach, without unnecessary barriers, and so on. She rebuilt the double garage for a one-room apartment with a kitchen, a patio, a terrace, and a bathroom core with a shower, which is more practical and safer than a bathtub for senior women. Zimbler realized that the quality of housing for seniors and its accessibility affects their quality of life and an active approach to it. In 1972, she designed additional housing units for active seniors. Another phenomenon that Zimbler promoted throughout her career was to contribute to the organization of the living space, the mobile interior. Built-in folding beds, pull-out work nooks, compact portable furniture, and easy-to-move furniture should ensure that the function of the room changes at least twice in a 24-hour cycle. The rooms thus had day and night options. This also applied to the pull-out desk. Here we go, which does not need to be spread out all day. And when the woman is not sitting at it, its place can be used in other ways, like here. Zimbler also used these interior transformation strategies in the men's rooms, and later also designed various stools or portable mattresses so that the seating or relaxation zone, a relaxation area, could be moved around the house. Changeable, sorry, I don't have a better picture of this. Changeable mobile elements reach their peak in the conversion of a rustic house in San Bernardino, where Zimbler designed a gate in the wall between the kitchen and the larger dining room, between which a heavy wooden table could be moved back and forth at will. When eating in the kitchen, there was free space in the dining room, and when eating in the dining room, there was more space in the kitchen. The final lesson from Zimbler, to which I have dedicated a separate blog post on the Vienna to the World project website, is recycling and upcycling. For economic, but also intuitively ecological reasons, Zimbler advocated the use of existing furniture and existing materials during reconstructions. In the case of the remodeling of a bedroom in Vienna in 1934, which I mentioned previously, she used existing furniture and lighting fixtures, from which she removed some finishes and out-to-date decorations and reused them in a new modern way and combinations. She has devoted herself to the promotion of recycling and upcycling several times on the pages of Perfect Home and Remodeling Guide magazines. In 1977, she designed the entire recycled house in Beverly Hills, which was supposed to save material and money while providing completely contemporary and comfortable living. Liane Zimbler was a nonconformist woman, a designer, a feminist. She has a lot to offer today, unlike many of her male colleagues, whether from the Viennese secession environment or representing California mid-century modernism, which was based on the myth of endless economic growth and the infinity of natural resources. And although her life trajectory was not always easy, and she built her career from scratch at least twice, she was not afraid to stand up to her male colleagues and harshly criticize them when she felt like it. When she was asked to comment on contemporary German architecture in 1962, she was not afraid to address the Romeo and Juliet minimal apartment project in Stuttgart from 1954 to 1959 as following, quote, "The apartment house by Hans Scharoun deserves the booby prize. It has messy layout, it's cramped, there is no storage space. The worst feature are the little penthouses on the top floor," end quote. I feel like most of all, we should learn from Zimbler's courage, and we should uplift women like Zimbler and listen to them more. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much for this fascinating talk, Ladislav. I'm sure that there will be many questions. I will be moving on to our second speaker for today, Joyce Corbett. She's an independent scholar specializing in folk art and cultural history in Central Europe. Her research includes folk art, dress and textiles, and early 20th century design. Her curatorial history includes Between East and West, Folk Art Treasures of Romania, which included a co-authored catalog, and the exhibition was shown at the Mingei International Museum in San Diego in 2011. Other exhibitions at this museum include Hungarian folk magic, the art of Josef Domjan, as well as at the Craft and Folk Art Museum, Eva Zeisel, extraordinary designer craftswoman at 100, and Dowry, Eastern European painted furniture, textiles, and folk art, as well as wearable folk art. She's the founder of the Ethnic Textile Collection, Textile Council of San Diego, and she's on the advisory board of the Mingei International Museum. Joyce has also co-authored the catalog to the exhibition Resplendent Dress from Southeastern Europe, Central European Embroidery, shown at the Fowler Museum at UCLA in 2013. She has presented lectures, conference papers, and publications internationally, and has organized travel for student groups to Hungary and Romania for folk culture, art, and architecture for nearly 20 years. At the moment, she is researching historic Hungarian costume and textile designs, as well as authoring a biography of the Hungarian designer Eva Zeisel, who is also in the focus of her talk today. Joyce, the floor is yours, and I will be sharing a PowerPoint.
Thank you very much, Julia. And thank you, Megan and Julia, for inviting me to this wonderful series of lectures, which is so welcome, especially in the United States, because we don't often get to hear people on an international basis. And thank you, Julia, for helping with the slides. I'm speaking today about the industrial designer, Eva Zeisel, who was the subject of an exhibition that I curated at the Menge International Museum in San Diego in 2006. And the show later traveled to Los Angeles to the Craft and Folk Art Museum. Next slide, please. Who was Eva Zeisel? In case you haven't heard, she lived to be 105 years old. It was a very fortunate circumstance for me because I had followed her career for some time to discover that the largest collection of Eva's designs happened to be in Northern California and also in Los Angeles. And it was the anniversary of her 100th birthday. So the director of the Menge International Museum, where I've been a curator for many years, agreed to have this show. Eva herself, at age 100, was told not to travel to the West Coast because her home was in New York. However, she did anyway come with her daughter to the opening of the exhibition and had a wonderful time. I asked her granddaughter to pose Eva's portrait, which would be the signature portrait for the exhibition, in front of Eva's self-portrait from the 20s, and a very beautiful self-portrait. So this was a landmark show, and we had over 200 pieces in the exhibition, and we had examples of everything that I'm going to be showing you today, which was quite a job. Today, I'm only talking about Eva in New York, which was her first sojourn in New York from 1938 to 1953. She had this very long career. She had a 95-year career. And by her own accounting, she designed more than 100,000 objects, mainly centered on the home and table, dinnerware, vases, glassware, dishes, tea and coffee pots, various articles of furniture, and even more. So I can't even begin to cover all of that, but you'll get a feeling for the kind of design she did. Eva herself said, "Everything I do is the direct creation of my hands, whether it is made in wood, plaster, or clay." Next slide. Eva was born in Budapest and came from what can only be called an extremely eminent family. This is her mother, Laura Polanyi Stricker. Eva's name, of course, was Eva Stricker until she married Hans Zeisel. Laura, Eva's mother, who was with her most of her life, even in the States, was from the renowned Polanyi family. They were assimilated Jewish intellectuals. Laura was an early feminist in the early 1900s and visited Dr. Freud, who called her the beautiful Mrs. Stricker. She was also a bit of a pioneer in education. And I'm sorry about this very bad photograph, but she had a nursery school, and Eva is in the photo. And also with his back to the camera is Arthur Koestler, who was a lifelong friend and colleague of Eva's. Next slide. The Polanyi family which eventually was forced to emigrate from Hungary, had wide-ranging interest. Mihai, Adolf, and Laura on the right. And of course, there was the Nobel Prize for Mihai. They all had to leave Europe, of course, with the advent of the Nazis. Next. Eva had a very fine classical education. She studied art history, she studied painting. She had talent as a painter, but she got interested in learning pottery. And she got so interested that she actually was the first woman to join the Potters Guild in Budapest. And you can see from the article on the left that she early on attracted attention. I think everywhere that Eva went, she always attracted attention. Next. In 1928, Eva went to Germany, and she had applied for this job at the Schramberg Majolika Fabrik as a designer. And she really, at this point, became launched as a true industrial designer. She did a lot of work for Schramberg and also for Karstens at Karstens porcelain fabric at various locations around Germany. She did not design the designs on the ceramics, and this followed her for most of her career. She designed the forms, and the designs were added by the staff designers. Next. Eva went to Berlin in 1930, and she was very much involved in the life of the Weimar Republic and intellectually, which was, as we all know, a very high time to be living with cafe society. She knew everyone there artistically, and they knew her. And this is her very wonderful looking modern apartment. Her mother, Laura, was also there. They shuttled back and forth between Budapest and Vienna quite often. It was kind of a normal thing to be in several places. In addition to the intellectual life, which was very exciting, there began to be problems with the Nazis, and people began to get the idea that it would be a good idea to get out of Berlin. Eva and her circle were fascinated by Russia at that time. There was a lot of folk art, culture, dance coming out of Russia by people who themselves were emigrating. However, it was an interesting place to visit, and she decided she would just go visit. Next, please. Once there, Eva, in her usual way, managed to find work. She was able to travel around what is now Ukraine. She was able to visit various places. She went to work for the Lomonosov porcelain factory and eventually became the director. Again, it was unusual for a woman to do that, but she managed it. This is Dulevo porcelain factory on the left, and on the right is Lomonosov. Again, not her designs at all, but these are very, very, very nice forms that really for their time were absolutely the latest thing. She enjoyed working there. She got to travel a lot, and she enjoyed meeting the people. Next, please. This good time there was interrupted suddenly one night by a knock on the door, and Eva was arrested. She was accused of plotting to kill Stalin. Of course, this happened to a lot of the expats who were living and working in Russia. And this is simply the circumstance at the time. Ava's experiences in prison later formed a good part of the novel Darkness at Noon by her friend Arthur Koestler. She was thrown into solitary confinement and for most of her 16 months stay there. At the end of that, she was released, and she thought that they had come to her cell to execute her. And in fact, she was put on a train to Vienna. Nobody knows quite why that happened, except that her family had lobbied, and especially her mother, very extensively to have her released. And there were even letters to Stalin from the concerned scientist organizations, which the Polanyi family was part of. We never have found out exactly what happened, but she went back to Vienna and joined her mother there. Next, please. This is quite an amazing picture. This is 3 generations. It's Eva, Laura, and the grandmother, Cecile. And this was taken in 1938. Prior to Eva's emigrating, Laura also, Cecile stayed in Europe and died the next year. What is amazing to me about it is this what really we're talking about with the diaspora. Here are people with long-time roots in Europe who are at the point in their lives where they have literally lost everything. They've lost their property, they've lost their art, they've lost their livelihoods, they've lost their friends, and they're about to embark on an adventure to a place they have never been, where they will start with nothing. And this, to me, is what we're really talking about with all of the subjects of these in the symposium, is the incredible bravery and optimism shown by all of these people. Next, please. So I'm only talking today about Eva's first time in New York, which was 1938 to 53. In this 95-year career, there are lots of chapters. However, if I wanted to continue with the rest of New York, we would need at least another couple hours. So this is basically a chapter in her life. Although by the time she got to New York in 1938, she'd already had numerous chapters. Eva married Hans Zeisel, who was a friend from Vienna in the UK right before she left. They left together for New York. They said they had $64 between them. And New York, Manhattan was a beautiful city at that time. Next, please. There was an awful lot happening. It was a very, very exciting place to be moving to. For one thing, these were the final years of the WPA, which was the Works Progress Administration, which was a government-funded program from the Great Depression, instituted by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, to give everyone in the United States work. And of course, this affected women very, very much. There were many, many programs also for the arts and women in the arts. It couldn't have been a better time for Eva to arrive. The photo on the bottom is actually a sewing room. The WPA set up these sewing rooms all over the United States for women to come and make clothes for people, make sewn items. It was a huge undertaking, and make sure that everybody had something nice to wear, and later turned into pre-war production. we were entering a pre-war era, and this, as it progressed through the next couple of years, also created an enormous market for women with jobs. I'm not just talking about joining the various branches of the military, although this was something that was on this level was unprecedented, but women began to work in industry to replace the men who were being called up into the military. And this was maybe not as much fun as this poster makes it look, but everyone went to work. Something else that was going on at that time in 1939 was the New York World's Fair. This was, again, a spectacular event for New York City, years in the making. It was really about the world. It was called the World of Progress. And the idea was that life was going to be much better in the future for everyone. It would be easier, it would be automated. And there were many, many progressive designs that were shown. A very popular thing that was shown was the first TV. This did not last past 1940 because the United States was then already into full-scale war production, but it was a boost to the city and to the environment. Next slide, please. Beautiful shot of the Tri-Island Perisphere and the statue of George Washington. Various American heroes were there, but it was an international World's Fair, and there was a Soviet pavilion. It was apparently the last one built, and there was quite a problem with this enormous figure which sat on top of it. Well, of interest to us is that it was widely reported that it was ceramic designs for Lomonosov were featured in the exhibition hall of this pavilion, credited to someone else's name. Next, please. Well, once Eva and Hans got to New York, she immediately found work by running around with contacts, going to the New York Public Library, meeting and greeting people. She didn't speak English well then, but she learned it. And she found work as she always did. Eva was very, very personable. And this was her design studio on the Upper West Side of Manhattan on Riverside Drive, where she began working. She also taught some classes at that time. And one of her first designs that was produced is the syrup pourer, which is a ubiquitous thing in the United States. It's found on every kitchen table and every restaurant, and even to this day, you will find that syrup pourer. Next, please. Eva got a job teaching at the Pratt Institute in Brooklyn, and she taught at Pratt Institute, basically well into the 60s, and enjoyed very much her teaching and her students. She also lectured widely. She published articles. She wrote for various newspapers, and her students produced this line called Strataware. She always credited her students, but actually she directed this. It was called Strataware, and it was a streamlined design, which streamlined design was quite a big thing in 1942. The Stratoliner airplane had come out at that time, and people were interested in this kind of supersonic looking design. It's a beautiful line. She, as I said, she always gave their students credit, but I think it's one of the first great productions that she made. Next, please. Eva was lecturing a lot at this time, as well as teaching at Pratt. And by the way, Eva's appointment at Pratt, I should mention, was a first for a woman to teach industrial design and to stress the design of China not as a handcraft, but as a legitimate production product. One of these lectures was attended by Elliot Noyes, who was, I guess he was known as the elitist modernist mentor of New York at that time. He was a design director at the Museum of Modern Art. And Elliot Noyes had an immense amount of power and influence on who designed what, how it was known, how it was publicized. He was an advocate for modern design, an extraordinary career himself. And he went to one of Eva's lectures at Pratt, and he liked her very much. And he asked her, excuse me, if she would design a set of dinnerware that could be exhibited at the Museum of Modern Art. This was a huge thing. Next slide, please. This is Eva's modern wear, museum wear, china that it was designed in 1942, but because of the war, the actual exhibition did not take place until 1946. I cannot emphasize how significant this exhibition was for Eva's career, because it put her on the map of modern designers. This set of dinnerware was the first all-white design in the United States. There might have been one in Europe before. All china up to that point had flowers or leaves or patterns or geometric designs. And there was no white china. We accept that as a normal thing today, but in 1942, it was extremely unusual. Castleton China produced did the production. And it wasn't until later, 1949, that for business reasons, they decided, well, they'll produce the line with patterns. This was a mixed success. Some of the patterns were commissioned for by designers, decoration, and some of them were commissioned for restaurants. So you might find a museum ware dish with a Dali pattern on it, or you might find a restaurant ware museum ware dish with a lobster on it. As I say, Eva never did any of those designs. There are some fine ones from the designer series, but this was strictly business on Castleton's part because they felt they couldn't market all white china. Next. This is the actual exhibition, which of course this looks quite simplified by today's standards, but at the time it was revolutionary. And this is the photo of Eva that was used on their press releases and publicity. The museum wear was available for purchase at fine department stores in Manhattan, and it was not inexpensive. Nothing from Museum of Modern Art recommendations, despite being recommended for middle-class families, none of this was considered really affordable by the masses. Next, please. Eva's next big success, and I will say probably the line of dinnerware she designed that has been the most beloved and popular, even to this day, was Red Wing China's Town and Country set. Red Wing approached Eva asking her for something Greenwich Village-y, which meant casual, bohemian, fun, colorful, which would be suitable for the newly casual lifestyle of young families immediately in post-war America. And this is what she came up with. It's whimsical, it's joyful, and it's just fun. There was a big change in dinnerware from enormous sets of formal china, which we're still seeing kind of the aftermath of this today, where people had sets of china that were 18 place settings with all kinds of various small pieces that accompanied them, including ashtrays for the table, to today's market, which is casual china that can be used on a daily basis. One of the enormous changes is that people no longer get teacups and saucers with their dinnerware, they get mugs. So this is a major change in foodways in the United States, at least. Next. The most popular part of this Town and Country set are the salt and peppers, which are affectionately nicknamed schmooze. Schmooze, for those of you who aren't familiar with United States comics, Shmoo was a cartoon character in an Al Cap cartoon that had this basic form. However, Eva vehemently denied that this shape had come from a cartoon. She said it was a mother-daughter, and here she is offering proof with her daughter, Jeannie. Eva, by this time, had 2 children, Jeannie and John, and they were very much part of the life in the studio there. Next. Eva took a leap into the unknown in terms of design, and this was her design for and patent for the resilient chair. This chair was never went into production. There were problems with the manufacturing, not the chair itself. There are really only 2 that we can locate. This one is in the Museum of Modern Art, and the other one is in the museum in Montreal. She designed this. Here is the frame for it. It's unfortunate that it didn't get produced, because I think Eva could have gone in that direction. Very late in life, she did design furniture, coffee tables, and chairs. And she realized that people needed furniture that could fold up and that would be portable. However, this is recognized as a very successful design that unfortunately never made it into production. Next. Hall China asked Eva to design dinnerware, and this is one of numerous dinner sets she designed for them, wedding with beautiful colors, patterns. And she, over a period of years, probably did more different patterns for them than anyone. Hall claimed that her sets were the most widely sold china in the United States. They certainly were everywhere, and they were popular. She also designed glassware at this time. I just can't go into all the different things that she did. She designed beautiful glassware, which you still find today around for federal glassware, a mass production of beautifully shaped glassware. Because of the fame that the Museum of Modern Art exhibition propelled her into, she was picked up by various home magazines. This is from American Home, and you would find her work in a lot of different table settings that were shown in women's home magazines, which were very beautifully done in those days. Next. I'm only taking you up until the early 50s because in 1953, Hans Zeisel accepted a position at the University of Chicago. He was a specialist in law and sociologist, and he had an extremely successful career in his own right. And in 1953, Eva decided that she would leave New York with the kids and move to Chicago with Hans. It did not work out. She didn't have the base of operations that she had in New York. And in 1954, she moved back to New York and began a whole other chapter, which I'm sorry I can't continue here. But when she continued to go to Chicago off and on, where Hans' colleagues knew her as Mrs. Zeisel, and she would entertain at dinner parties, and they did not realize how famous she was in New York in her own right. Eva did a series of different projects for stoneware companies. Her stoneware is very popular and sought after by collectors. Here she is at the clay pit in Monmouth, Illinois, and working with the production staff. This is just one of many stoneware pieces. I saw this online recently on the vintage site for over $1,000. They're all highly collectible and extremely creative. She used rubber stamps. She used all kinds of different motifs. She used birds and animals. She had dinnerware she had designed for children. Very, very creative and active period in her life. And so this ends her first New York sojourn. By then, her mother had arrived. Other relatives had arrived. They worked very hard getting visas for people to get out of Europe, and were successful for the most part, but not all. Next. Eva had a period of time where the dinnerware industry changed. A lot of things were coming from Japan, and she designed some lines from Japan that were produced in Japan. But there was a hiatus in which she became politically active and also worked on a historical project that interested her very much. She traveled also during the late 50s, early 60s. And it was a period where, however, two amazing things happened to her late in life. She received an NEA, which is National Endowment for the Arts, fellowship to return to Hungary and work on a line for Kispester Granit. Actually, Eva had designed for Kispester very, very early on before she left Budapest. So she did the line. I actually have saw the pieces that she did at the Ipar Művészeti Museum, the Applied Arts Museum in Budapest. They still have those, and they were reproduced here in the United States by DWR, Design Within Reach, where you could still buy these designs. At the same time there, she was given a one-person exhibition honoring her work. And there she is at the museum, at the Applied Arts Museum. I think that must have been a marvelous thing for her to come back. Her daughter, Jeannie, of course, came with her. She visited her childhood home on Istenhead. It was a great, wonderful experience. And of course, there are still many relatives there. Next. At the same time, she made the trip to Pécs, which is in southern Hungary, to the Zsolnai factory. If you're not familiar with Hungarian ceramics, you won't have heard of Zsolnai, but if you know anything about it, these were the preeminent ceramics manufacturer of the 20th century. From turn of the 19th to 20th century on, Zsolnai produced building tiles, street tiles. If you went to the spa or the bath, the tiles in the spa and the bath, decorative, beautiful tiles would be from Zsolnai. In addition, they produced household goods, which were for every day, but also fine china, which they were known as the Tiffany of China and Tiffany of Hungary, and produced these iridescent glazes, which they were known for. So Eva went down to Pécs and she designed these beautiful fruit-shaped, this line. I think it was one of the nicest things that she ever did. It's extremely creative. And of course, she was we're looking at 1984, she was already getting older. Next, please. In 2000, Eva suddenly was rehabilitated by the Russian government, and a group of workers from the Lomonosov porcelain factory came to New York and visited Eva. It definitely marked a change in attitude. So in 2000, she went back to work at the Lomonosov factory by the now called the Imperial Porcelain Factory. She worked with some of the original assistants and production people that she had known when she was there in the 30s before her arrest. She designed what I consider to be the masterpiece of her designs, with the talisman, dinnerware talisman named after her granddaughter. And you can't possibly see it in the photograph, but it is a very fine, translucent porcelain. And here she is at age, I believe this photo was taken 88, holding it up. Her creativity never dimmed in her entire 105 years. She was still producing art at 105. Her vision and her hearing, of course, dimmed. And you will see in the book cover I'm going to show you that she began to work with cut paper for the shapes, and her assistant could do the renderings. The last thing that Eva designed, one of the last things, was a set of tableware, which was produced actually in Japan. And the cut paper designs are at the Cooper, that she made, are at the Cooper Hewitt Museum in New York, and you can see them. Next. This is Eva's work on design, which is her philosophy, and here you see her in her later years working with the cut paper. The book on the right was in production when we had our exhibition, and we'd hoped we'd have a book, but this didn't appear until 2013. It is a monumental work. It's really a catalog raisonné of all of Eva's work. Next. So this is our last wonderful photo. And I thank you very much for inviting me to participate. And thank you, Julia, for your help with this.
Thank you so much for this very rich presentation, Joyce. I'm sure that there are many questions, so I'm opening up the floor to our audience. maybe, oh yeah.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for both of these wonderful talks today. I learned so much. It was really interesting and wonderful to see all of those images. You know, as I've been listening to the talks throughout the symposium, I've been trying to formulate questions, and it's so hard, you know, as you're just, things are coming at you. But one thing I noticed from both of your talks today, both Joyce and Ladislav, the mention of sort of mother-daughter relationships. And I wondered if you had any more thoughts about that, whether that being a kind of, I don't know, something you had thought about any further, either with Liane Zimbler's actual professional partnership that she had with her daughter, or Joyce with thinking of Eva Zeisel's inspiration for those wonderful salt and pepper shakers in the relationship she had with her daughter. I also loved those kind of 3-generation photos that you showed of the grandmother and the mother as well.
Well, it's no question that Laura Polan-Stricker had an incredible influence on Eva, and they were really best friends for all of her life. And when Eva was in prison, Laura was absolutely unbelievably active in trying to get her out. She also had Laura also was fearless. She had some run-ins with the Nazis. She was called in by the Nazis and questioned about her daughter. They apparently fled Vienna on the last train out of Vienna. So there was an extremely strong tie there, lifelong. It was interesting because they wrote letters in, I've been lucky enough to look at a lot of their correspondence. They wrote in German. Most upper class Hungarian families spoke German, and they wrote in German. And when they got to the States, they started writing in English. And eventually, as they both improved. But Eva always felt that her designs were families, that the pieces belonged to each other, that they related to each other. And she certainly, when her children were young, she was designing baby feeders and things like that. The Neue Gallery in New York has in their shop, has, I believe, the baby feeder design reproduced. So it's no question that Eva, I believe someone asked her what she wanted to be remembered for. She said, oh, not my designs, my family, the love of my family.
Yeah, can you hear me? Oh, okay. I believe, first of all, I think it is important to say that Liane Zimbler was apparently quite a very collaborative person in general. She liked to collaborate with people, especially with women, of course. She always needed some partner to work with. And second of all, the situation of expatism and political migration in particular, because you can't plan it ahead, and you don't plan what you're going to do there when you arrive, is sort of ties these family bonds even more together. Because I did some research on Jaroslav Polívka, which Julia mentioned in the introduction, who was an expat, who was an immigrant to the United States also in 1938 to 1939. And he always made sure, and he was 53, so he was the same generation as Zimbler, and he always wanted to make sure that his children have a secure job and that the job is good, and he tried to promote them, and he worked literally till the end of his life, probably mostly to ensure that his sons make a decent living and follow his footsteps, because both of them became civil engineers. I think this was the same thing with Liane Zimbler, because her daughter was 16 when they arrived to the United States. And apparently she did have some talent in the visual arts and design and architecture. So it was only natural to start working together. And of course, there was the circumstance that Anita Thor passed away and Liane Zimbler took over. So it was only natural to employ her daughter, who apparently she was on a very good terms with. We don't really have that much correspondence, so I can't really say. And most of the communication between them, of course, happened in the office or on a face-to-face level. But there is one letter or one document that when Eva Zimbler later recalled or went over through the entire relationship and how the partnership worked with her mother, and she really remembered it as something very natural, as something very harmonious, and something that benefited both of them. So yeah, I think that's those are the two aspects of it: the immigration situation, and that Eva Zimbler and Liane Zimbler really like to work with someone. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Thank you both for those responses. Yeah, I have other ways in which those that question connects to things that I've been working on as well. So I was curious about your responses. It kind of makes me think, Ladislav, like from a historian's point of view, in the future, you know, how would you learn about those more kind of ephemeral connections between, you know, family members who are in the same house? They obviously have a lot of contact with one another all the time, but there's maybe no record. I'm just thinking, like, will people scroll through the phone now to see what all the texts were? You know, come to dinner, that sort of thing. That's really, really interesting. Thank you.
I have a question also. I was wondering about the networks and the feminist agenda of Liane Zimbler, because we are working with Gestalterinnen in the book, following the symposium of the MAC, and we figured out how one was motivating the other, how it was like a chain of responses, like Elsa Hoffman would write about single design for a single woman, and then Liane Zimbler will pick up so we are into this, we have established that there was an interconnections between the women, professional women, like a journalist, a photographer, and an architect. And then the question, do you think we need to try and trace backward who initiated it? Like you referred to the Vienna, you know, who, or was it like parallel going on in Vienna between Liane Zimbler and Elsa Hoffman? And there was also Zwieback, the department store owner, the background. Finally, there was Maria Licatz, that they were dialogue. Is there any point, like in a classical canon, when we speak about canon of modernism, is there a point in trying to trace back who initiated it, who's, you know, who patronized it? Because we have several. We have Gisela Orban, who's writing about women architects. We have the two prominent ones, Ruth Lihotzky and Ella Briggs. So is there a point in trying to trace it historically, who got pushed what, like dates and exhibitions?
Sorry, I had a little trouble hearing you, but I hope I got it right. I think more, of course, Josef Hoffmann was very important to Zimbler, no doubt about that, and the Wiener Werkstätte production. But she also
not Joseph Hoffmann, Elsa Hoffmann. Joseph Hoffmann is out of this game. It's not part of it. Yeah.
But what was important to Zimbler, and what she also recalled later in life, because most of her writings are from the times when after she migrated to the United States. So it's only like retrospective recollections what was happening between the war. So of course there's the distortion of humans' memory and stuff like that. And but she was very inspired by the whole Red Vienna movement and the whole municipal building program. But she had a very interesting approach to this, because of course the Red Vienna and the municipal housing was supposed to house the masses and of course the working class, and building for the working class, and creating form for the working class citizens. But then Liane Zimbler figure out that if the housing is supposed to be really for everyone, then it also has to be for the rich people, or the former rich people who lost their fortune and who lost their way, who lost their wealth during the First World War, who used to be rich, but now there's no place for them. And also she wanted the housing to be also for former military members, or the members of the military of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, who were also sort of marginalized after the First World War because they lost in the entire former Austrian-Hungarian Empire. So she thought that we should also focus on finding healthy and of course hygienic and spacious living for former nobility who lost their wealth and who lost their titles, and also for former military members. So that's what she was coming from, and that's quite inspiring to me, that she was really thinking, of course, about housing literally everyone and these super marginalized groups that nobody thought of at that time. Of course, she was thinking about single women. She was thinking about single mothers. She was thinking about all these other groups that the program thought of. But this was an interesting thing, and this was the only thing when she recollected something from the interwar Vienna period. So I believe that it was something that was really essential to her.
And I have one more question for Joyce. Thank you very much. It is interesting about the materials that you depicted, that you try to outline between the grandma, and this photo of the three generations is fantastic. In many ways, it's also similar to the story, a different matriarch in Vienna in the interwar of the Flogger sisters. And the mother, they're living, the mothers, the sisters, and the daughters in the same household. And there, one of my colleagues, Lena Gardner, figured out that there is an influence between this arrangement of the matriarchal household and the design language. As a kind, if you speak about gender issue, as a more feminine and more addressing to, in regard to the surrealist language or the amorphic language that Eva Zeisel uses. And at one point, they also, I think she separates from her husband. Her husband goes to Chicago and she stays in New York. They are not really together, so she's really remains with her mother. And the question is, do you think it had any role in shaping her design language, this matriarch?
Well, it was a little bit of an unusual arrangement, you have to say. I think that Eva was such a strong personality that she was certainly not willing to say, I'm going to sublimate my career and go live in Chicago and start all over again there, when she had a perfectly wonderful career going in New York City as a result of this marvelous exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art. And she and her husband just agreed to work it out that way, although she was always very much connected to him and visited him. So I think that she had her own path to pursue, and nothing was going to stand in her way in terms of sublimating her role as wife and mother. She still was devoted to her family and devoted to her mother. And her uncles lived there were many relatives around too in New York. So uprooting to Chicago just was no way was going to work for her. On the other hand, Hans had a marvelous career. So there wasn't any chance that he would ever move back. So it was a modern style marriage. What can you say? Without cell phones.
Ladislav, I can see that you have your hand raised. Do you have a question?
Yes. I actually have a question for Joyce. Thank you so much for your very engaging talk. It was fascinating to see the products that she did and the designs she did, and of course follow her life trajectory. But I have one question. It's kind of minor, but it sort of stuck to me. Why did she decide to move from Berlin to Moscow?
It was simply the spirit of adventure. It was not because she was a dedicated communist. It was a political. I think she had friends who were doing that. In fact, she had an early marriage to one of them, Alex Weisberg, and I think she planned to stay a couple weeks. Particularly since the situation in Berlin was so chaotic at that time. And of course, when she got work there, then she got involved in that. Right. I don't think of any serious political commitment or any idea that she was really going to move there.
Okay,
people
thank
have
you.
Question.
If I may, I think, well, we'll still have some time, but maybe we should slowly be closing, but I have to ask a question to each of the speakers. They're maybe quite different. So my question to Ladislav is, my interest really focuses on this sort of Austrian and Czech or Czechoslovak exchanges as well. And I was really fascinated by the material that you've shown about Brno. So it's quite a practical question, I guess. Has anything about the apartment, not department, has anything about the apartment been preserved? Does the villa still exist? And is this something that is can maybe even be visited? Yeah.
Yes. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
No, go ahead. I'll ask my question.
Oh, okay. So yes. So I showed you in one of them slides. I know there was a lot of visual material, but in one of them slides there was the red door, which was painted with nice roses and flowers, and that's actually from the house, from the Brno. I actually it's quite recent because I got the photographs from my colleagues Dagmar Černoušková and Lucia Waldhanzová quite recently, a couple of days ago. So they visited the villa in, I believe, 2016, and there is some of the stuff preserved, mostly the built-in features like the door and the built-in furniture and the built-in bar, for example, because I managed to compare it with the contemporary press and the images, which are quite limited. There are only like 8 images of the interiors, and the villa was quite extended. So I compared the photographic material that they sent me with the designs of Zimbler and the original photographs. So yes, there are a couple of things. There are some chairs and some tables that I'm not really sure about. I need to visit it, and we already discussed that they will arrange, because they have the contact, so they will arrange the meeting for me. So if you want, you can join me. But the son of the original owner, Mr. Trnka, Mr. Trnka, the Trnka sold the villa after the Second World War, but the son of this owner still lives there, and he's in his, I think, 80s or 90s. So we should keep it small. Yeah.
Amazing, since the Brno architecture manual has quite a lot of men, very few women. It would be great to.
Oh yeah, they already asked me, because Lucia Waldhanzová works for the Brno architectural manual. So she already asked me, since I'm familiar with these designs of Zimbler, she already asked me to write an entry on that house. So hopefully it will appear there too. Yeah.
Great. Before I pass the mic on to Ron Polivka, there's a question from Elana in the chat, which relates to the villa, which is if it had been Aryanized.
Oh, the Plaček villa in Brno?
Yeah.
Oh, no, because they never owned it. They just rented the house because there was some kind of, I'm not really sure that if Plaček owed Trnka money or Trnka owned Plaček money, but as the result was that they rented the villa. And then when they left, the Plaček, well, actually, Robert Plaček went to the concentration camp, which he survived. He was in Buchenwald, and then they moved to Canada. And then he returned to Czechoslovakia to put his financial things in order in 1950s. But no, it wasn't, because they never owned it, and the Trnkas, who were the owners of the house, were Czech nationality, and they spoke Czech. So no.
Okay.
There's a hand raised by Ron Polivka.
Can you hear me? I wanted to thank Joyce and Ladislav. I found your presentations very interesting. Thank you for that. Ladislav, I'm going to ask you the same question or similar you asked Joyce. And excuse me if you maybe already answered it and I missed it, but I was really interested to see Zimbler's very creative designs, especially back in Europe and during that time frame. I love seeing the picture of her on the ladder, showing the
That's
guys
my favorite one, yeah.
how it should be done in their high heels and fur coat or whatever it was, but that was pretty special. Could you answer this similar question? I'm curious, how was it that she came to Los Angeles? And I noticed in the 1970s, she's now in partnership with her daughter. And I'm wondering, is her daughter continuing on with that type of quality of work that her mother was doing at the time?
She came to Los Angeles. We are not really clear about why she decided to move to Los Angeles after she came to New York City. But she had some friends that she already knew in Vienna who came to Los Angeles. So probably these ties or these relationships made her to come to Los Angeles. And apparently Los Angeles was going through a lot of structural changes, and there were a lot of opportunities for designers and architects. So I guess that was the main reason, but I don't have any proofs, or I don't have any written testimonies that would discuss this. So she employed her daughter, I believe, right after the Second World War, when she was in her 20s, they continued working with each other until the end of the 1970s. So they worked together for more than 30 years.
Okay.
And then she retired. Liane Zimbler retired, and she died in 1987. Her daughter continued working in the interior design and decoration business. I am not really familiar with any of her designs because that was really not my focus, but she was actually one of the main persons who I don't know if she was there when the International Archive of Women in Architecture was funded, but she was definitely for quite some time a member of the board committee that overlooked over the International Archive of Women in Architecture, and that's how Liane Zimbler archive got to Blacksburg, Virginia, because of this international archive. It's quite fascinating because they have, I believe, around 100 or even more than 100 entries, or more than 100 women's archive of women from all over the globe. So that's how it got there. But there are really no more. I didn't really look into her work, or didn't really find any of her designs, mostly because I was not really looking for it.
Okay, thank you.
It's a good question. Yeah,
Thank you.
If I may, I'll ask a last question to Joyce, which is, you've showed how mobile Eva Zeisel was throughout her young years. And of course, this was a time that after the First World War, there were many progressive Hungarians either forced to emigrate or who emigrated and who lived exactly in Vienna in Russia, in Berlin. So I was wondering if you could maybe say a little bit more about her networks there. What sort of connections did she have to maybe members of the Hungarian avant-garde? Which people did she spend her time with in Berlin, in Vienna, but maybe also in Moscow?
When she went to her first job in Schramberg, she answered an ad in the newspaper, and she didn't know anyone there. It's interesting because Schramberg now has a name of Zeisel Street. They recognized it. Vienna and Budapest were linked. They were just two cities that were constantly in touch. The family had a place to live there. I said that Arthur Koestler was actually able to live together with him for a while, but Arthur lived with everybody sequentially, and they stayed friends forever. She knew Hans Zeisel. The group that went to Russia was an interesting one. They were Jewish intellectuals. Weisberg was preeminent among them, and he, by the way, was also jailed by the Russians. Berlin, the crowd that there was everybody. There seemed to have been a large circle of people who were involved in the arts, and there's been a lot written about it. She wasn't really living in Berlin that long, but long enough that she had quite I think, good circle of friends, maybe who were Hungarians too. There were a lot of Hungarians in Vienna in the 30s. There still are.
Thank you so much. And I think on that note, if there's no more question, I'm going to thank our speakers again and announce our talk for next week, which will be our second keynote by Rebecca Hauser, which we very much look forward to. Have a lovely evening.